In the early morning of October 27th, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones identified unusual movements along contested supply routes connecting Russian forces with their logistical partners. By 3:30 AM, precision strikes were underway. This tactical operation soon escalated, dealing one of the most significant blows to the Russia-China defense nexus, a military partnership valued at nearly $8.7 billion. For the last 2 years, China's involvement in Russia's conflict in Ukraine had largely been obscured, cloaked in plausible deniability, and framed as dual-use technology transfers. While Beijing publicly asserted neutrality, mounting evidence suggested that advanced optics, communications equipment, and components for drone and missile systems were steadily filtering into Russian stockpiles. However, after Ukraine's coordinated counterattack exposed and crippled key assets linked to this defense pact, Beijing's carefully maintained strategy began to unravel. At 4 AM, Ukrainian missile units operating near Zaporizhzhia launched a precision strike on a convoy believed to be transporting Chinese-manufactured radar systems to Russian artillery positions. Subsequent satellite imagery confirmed the destruction was near total. Dozens of transport vehicles were destroyed, and several Russian technicians overseeing the equipment were reportedly among the casualties. This event was not merely a localized setback. It signaled that Ukraine was prepared to challenge any nation enabling Moscow's war machine. The destruction of Russian-Chinese experimental counter-drone arrays, part of an $8.7 billion defense pact, exposed the vulnerability of their collaboration. This was a major embarrassment for both nations. Inside the Kremlin, the incident highlighted Russia's increased reliance on foreign defense due to sanctions. Questions arose about China's logistical support, with Russian generals citing delays, defects, and inadequate training. Meanwhile, Chinese state outlets remained silent. No official acknowledgement came from Beijing. Yet digital forensics teams traced a flurry of deletions from military-industrial research forums within China, erasing posts that had previously celebrated the success of Sino-Russian technical exchanges. Analysts interpreted this as a quiet effort to suppress public association with Russia's latest military failure. At 4:45 AM, the Ukrainian General Staff released a brief statement confirming the operation's success, without directly naming China. The message was clear, but measured. All supply networks aiding hostile aggression will be neutralized. The precision of that language underscored Kyiv's broader strategy of targeting the ecosystem of support rather than solely the Russian front lines. This was not just retaliation, it was deterrence. China's defense circles faced severe fallout from a $8.7 billion defense pact with Russia, which included drone, satellite, and radar upgrades. Nearly 30% of systems were inoperable due to Ukrainian action or Russian mishandling. Chinese officials debated continuing covert aid, as ongoing involvement risked international backlash and jeopardized vital European trade relations, outweighing the symbolic alliance with Moscow. By 5:15 AM, intercepted transmissions indicated that Chinese advisors embedded within Russian logistics operations were being quietly withdrawn. Trucks that once carried advanced targeting modules were now being repurposed to transport fuel and non-military supplies. What had been promoted as a transformative partnership was beginning to disintegrate under the weight of battlefield realities. Ukraine's successful strike destroyed Russian radar systems, disrupting their operational planning and increasing their vulnerability to drone attacks. The deliberate timing coincided with Chinese logistics rotations, severing a key supply line and undermining joint Russian-Chinese engineering efforts. The incident exposed a critical flaw in China's defense exports. Advanced systems lacked the resilience for high-intensity combat. Optimized for precision over survivability, they were catastrophically destroyed by modern munitions. Kyiv's President Zelensky presented the operation as a display of Ukrainian resolve, subtly warning that any state contributing to aggression would face consequences. Western governments lauded the strike, recognizing Ukraine's enhanced capabilities and the message it sent to undecided nations about the risks of indirect involvement in Russia's war. By 6:15 AM, International media outlets began circulating reports about the Chinese connection. Analysts on global networks dissected the financial and strategic implications, highlighting how Beijing's covert assistance had turned from an asset into a liability. Dawn revealed the destruction of Chinese-linked defense assets, a strategic turning point. Russia faced increased isolation, while China's economic and geopolitical balancing act was exposed as fragile. By sunrise, satellite imagery confirmed Chinese logistical convoys for Russia had halted. As daylight hit Beijing, Chinese officials convened an emergency session. Ukrainian strikes had obliterated convoys carrying Chinese-made radar arrays, surveillance drones, and encrypted communication systems destined for Russia, costing nearly one-fifth of the $8.7 billion defense pact equipment. At 7:10 a.m., the first internal memorandum circulated through the State Council. It did not reference the strikes directly, instead emphasized the necessity of re-evaluating the international exposure of sensitive trade in dual-use technologies. The message was clear. Beijing sought distance from Moscow's battlefield failures. In the corridors of Zhongnanhai, frustration was evident. The leadership had viewed the defense pact as a calculated gamble to strengthen strategic depth against Western influence, a gamble that now threatened to collapse publicly. Analysts within China's own think tanks began to question the logic of supporting a war that appeared unwinnable. Internal policy papers described the Russian military as an overextended partner whose logistical weaknesses cannot be offset by external aid. Beijing's economic planners, alarmed by the volatility of European trade markets, urged restraint. In Moscow, the tone was markedly different. Russian state media initially ignored the incident, but by mid-morning commentators began hinting at failures of imported equipment. Without naming China, several retired officers publicly criticized foreign systems unsuited for real-time battlefield demands. The subtext was unmistakable. Beijing was being blamed for the debacle. A leaked Russian report at 7:45 a.m. confirmed the destruction of our Long Horizon Initiative systems, a joint Sino-Russian effort against Ukrainian drones. This failure caused political strain, with Russia demanding reassurances from China. China's response of continued cooperation within internationally acceptable frameworks signaled a quiet disengagement. Ukraine, meanwhile, used a morning briefing to highlight the operation's success, framing it as part of a campaign to disrupt Russian supply chains, focusing on data and precision. International observers praised Ukraine's professionalism. Western intelligence agencies corroborated Kyiv's claims, confirming that intercepted Russian communications revealed panic among logistics units. The United States and European Union issued statements emphasizing that any state facilitating aggression through covert military transfers must face accountability. The diplomatic message reached Beijing clearly. By 8:30 a.m., Ukrainian analysts appeared on major international networks, outlining how the strike not only weakened Russia's battlefield capacity, but also disrupted its global defense partnerships. Chinese financial markets experienced instability as defense stocks fell due to reports of logistical setbacks abroad, leading investors to question China's arms export reliability. European envoys began reassessing cooperation with Chinese tech firms suspected of aiding Russian defense, prompting the European Commission to emphasize transparency and compliance with dual-use export regulations. Shipping insurers subsequently raised premiums on cargoes using Chinese-Russian logistics routes. At the UN, Ukraine's ambassador presented satellite imagery to the Security Council, showing destroyed convoys with Chinese-manufactured equipment, asserting Ukraine would defend against all enablers of aggression. Russia dismissed the claims, but the images impacted neutral nations. By 9:45 a.m., Washington and Brussels jointly proposed an inquiry into the potential violation of export control agreements by Chinese firms. This move signaled a growing willingness among Western allies to confront Beijing's indirect involvement. Back in Beijing, officials opted for public silence. Carefully curated stories appeared in state media, emphasizing China's commitment to peace and stability, with no mention of the destroyed convoys. Behind closed doors, the silence masked intense debate. The Ministry of Commerce urged the leadership to scale back all shipments of sensitive materials to Russia, citing the growing risk of secondary sanctions. Meanwhile, the People's Liberation Army expressed frustration over the exposure of classified technology. In Moscow, desperation grew. With Chinese supply lines disrupted, Russia turned inward, accelerating efforts to revive its own dormant manufacturing base, a monumental task after years of sanctions. Russian defense officials floated the idea of seeking covert assistance from smaller states, yet these measures could only patch the larger crisis. By 10:45 a.m., Russia's defense ministry released a statement reaffirming strategic partnership with friendly nations, with the omission of China's name noted by observers. As the morning progressed, Ukraine leveraged its success diplomatically. President Zelensky held calls with several European leaders, emphasizing the importance of sustained international unity. By 11:20 a.m., analysts across NATO circles described the operation as a textbook case of hybrid deterrence, demonstrating psychological leverage by forcing Russia's allies to reconsider their involvement. In Beijing, senior policymakers convened for a final review before noon. The conclusion was pragmatic. Continued overt support for Russia had become untenable. Orders were quietly issued to suspend new arms transfers under the existing pact, pending logistical review. The decision, though framed bureaucratically, effectively marked the end of the $8.7 billion defense agreement. As the day progressed, the tremors from the 3:30 a.m. strikes continued. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, intelligence analysts reviewed imagery confirming the strike's precision, described as a surgical dismantling of strategic dependency. By early afternoon, discussions began on how to reinforce Ukraine's advantage, with member states proposing accelerated delivery of air defense and reconnaissance systems. The strike also reignited debate over Europe's economic exposure to China, prompting calls for stricter export controls. By 1:15 p.m., internal reports from China's Ministry of Commerce revealed a downturn in foreign defense inquiries. The perception had shifted. If Chinese technology could be neutralized so decisively, its strategic value diminished. Privately, Chinese strategists debated how to reassert credibility, with some advocating a pivot toward diplomatic mediation. In Moscow, the aftershocks were more immediate. By 2 p.m., leaked field reports revealed that Russian units, lacking Chinese-supplied radar and communication links, were reverting to outdated Soviet-era tactics. Casualties mounted as Ukrainian drones resumed precision attacks. The Kremlin sought to contain the damage, but the Sino-Russian alliance was fragmenting. In Washington, officials seized the moment. At 2:30 p.m., the US State Department convened a press briefing, warning nations against circumventing sanctions. The spokesperson noted, "Any state that aids an aggressor bears shared responsibility for its actions." The war was now clearly framed as the epicenter of a broader struggle over international accountability. In Kyiv, the mood was one of cautious triumph. At 3:45 p.m., President Zelensky addressed senior military officers, stating, "Our strength lies not in the number of our weapons, but in the clarity of our purpose." This encapsulated Ukraine's strategic transformation. By late afternoon, international perception had decisively shifted. Even neutral nations like India, Vietnam, and Indonesia reassessed the wisdom of deep military ties with Moscow or Beijing. By evening, global markets had begun to absorb the implications. Beijing's economic planners faced the reality that the Pact's collapse had undermined years of diplomatic effort. Moscow found itself increasingly isolated. As the day drew to a close, the 3:30 a.m. strike had evolved into a message for the modern age. Aggression, no matter how heavily financed or disguised, can be dismantled. By 6:45 p.m., the world began to absorb this new reality. The map of influence had shifted. Russia's alliances had weakened. China's ambitions had been checked, and Ukraine's resilience had redrawn the moral geography of Europe. The events of October 27th mark a significant strategic turning point. Beginning with Ukraine's 3:30 a.m. precision strikes, a tactical operation rapidly exposed the vulnerabilities of the $8.7 billion Sino-Russian defense pact. As the day unfolded, the fallout became clear. Moscow faced critical equipment shortages and growing isolation, while Beijing quietly disengaged to protect its global standing. The pact, once a symbol of unified defiance, effectively collapsed under the weight of Ukrainian deterrence. By evening, the incident had reshaped the geopolitical landscape, underscoring the risks of indirect aggression and highlighting Ukraine's strategic resilience.